Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. Excited to see y'all here on this webinar. Appreciate you joining us for today's conversation. This session is part of Praxis's Rural Restore series, focused on wellness for rural advocates. My name is Elena Anderson-Eggert, and I'm a program and training specialist at Praxis. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm joining you today from Minneapolis in Minnesota. We acknowledge that we reside and work on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people, their communities, and their ancestors. We acknowledge the land in order to show respect, express gratitude, and to honor the ancestors, communities, and future generations of each of our places. Today's webinar is supported by the Office of Violence Against Women, and I'm so excited to get to spend this bit of time with all of you. First, I'll hand it off to Ku for some tech reminders.
Selena. So we won't actually be, or you all won't be participating on camera or microphone today, so you can feel free to mute your cameras and microphones by clicking on those microphone and video camera options down on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. We do have closed captioning available, and you can access that by clicking on the CC icon down in your Zoom toolbar. Additionally, there's also Spanish interpretation, and you can access that by clicking on the little globe icon. It says interpretation on it, and then select the Spanish channel. Besides that, if you need any help, feel free to text me or Christopher Rosa from TA to TA, and I'll also include my email in the chat if you need additional help. And that's it for the tech reminders.
Thank you, Ku. Always so helpful to have you here with us, managing everything in the background and available by chat in case anyone needs you. So today we're going to spend our time together in conversation about this topic of wellness in rural communities. I'll give you a brief overview of what we already covered in the first session of Rural Restore, which was just sort of laying a foundation about this topic of burnout, fatigue, and the concept of balance. We'll take some time to get grounded in our bodies and have a little reflection space. But the majority of this session will be spent with three amazing rural advocates who are joining us today, dialoguing about this topic with space for all of you to listen and join in the chat with any thoughts or questions. And one thing at the end that we're going to try out today is a little bit of a positive sharing space. So a time for all of you who are with us today to share some things in the chat that are going well for you. So often we are focused on what's hard about this work, the struggles that we're facing, and that's incredibly important to be able to acknowledge and validate. We'll spend a lot of time going through that this afternoon. But we want to end also with some time for y'all to share your wins, your achievements that could be in your work with survivors, within your organization, your community. So I'm planting that seed now in case you want to think about it during this session, and then we'll have some space to share that with each other at the end. Like I said, today I'm Elena Anderson-Eggert. I'll be facilitating. I'm joined by Ku, who you just heard from, my colleague at Praxis. In addition, we have three guest speakers, Candy Harper, who is the legal advocate at Catherine Cobb Safe House in Adrian, Michigan. We have Serenity Holbrook, who is the legal services coordinator at Turning Point for victims of domestic and sexual violence in River Falls, Wisconsin. And finally, we have Nora Heaton, who is the Rural Services Coordinator at Riverview Center in Dubuque, Iowa. So it looks like we have them all spotlighted if you want to give a wave. And we'll hear from them in a little bit, so we can take them off screen. Thank you. And this webinar is brought to you by Praxis, hosted by us. So some of you who are with us today, you might know Praxis already. You might have been tied to our work in some way over the last 20 plus years. But for others, this might be the first time that you've joined us. So if you're new to us, Praxis is a nonprofit training and technical assistance organization. Our mission is to advance transformative change to end gender-based violence and establish equity. We promote social change advocacy at individual, institutional, and community levels by engaging with gender-based violence organizations just like yours all around the country. And we do that through the programs that you see here on the slide. So there's the Advocacy Learning Center, our institutional analysis work, our Strengthening Rural Advocacy project, and also our role as the Rural Comprehensive TA provider, which is what brings us here today for this call. And there will be more information at the end about how you can stay connected and learn more about Praxis's work. So like I said, this is the second session in a new series that Praxis is calling Rural Restore, real conversations about burnout, balance, and resilience in rural advocacy. We know that rural advocates are essential to their community's well-being, and still their own wellness is often overlooked or under-resourced, and that can sometimes lead to burnout. So starting with this session and for the rest of the series, we'll be featuring a conversation with roughly 3 advocates dialoguing about their experiences with advocacy fatigue, including what led them there, how they're responding to challenges, what it's like to work and try to be well in their communities. The idea here is to create relatable conversations for everyone who joins. We want to provide a brave and validating space for advocates to talk to each other and hear each other's stories. In the first session of the Rural Restore series, we laid down a couple of foundational ideas that I do just want to cover and touch on really briefly here, and giving some definitions or some background to what brought us here. So we talked about this idea of advocacy fatigue. We define that as the normal expression of exhaustion and stress for those working to end gender-based violence that stems from daily and ongoing overarching struggles to create change for survivors in our communities in the context of social injustice. It's a bit of a wordy definition, but it comes from all of the very real experiences that we've heard from advocates in rural communities and beyond about this feeling of burnout, sometimes also referred to as advocate fatigue. And we know that that fatigue is caused by oppression and then exacerbated by some of these more local or specific factors in our programs, like a lack of resources, a lack of feeling valued or being taken seriously or valued in the community or in society, and limited power within the organization or within the systems that we're trying to influence. And so if there's already all of these things that are kind of hovering over the experience of being an advocate, it can be even harder then when an organization doesn't attend to the needs and the well-being of the staff who are working there, and can increase the experience of advocacy fatigue. And sometimes that results in really complex experiences and difficulties for those of us working in this movement. And the main thing I want to say about that is that it's normal. We are bringing that to this call because we've heard it from so many advocates that they are either currently on the edge of burnout, they have been, they are dealing with stress within the workplace or within their life that's making it difficult to be in their workplace. It's normal. The work we're doing is hard. And it's okay if that's an experience that you're having and if that's what you're bringing to this call. Either way, we want to offer this space to share and validate the fact that that's a fairly common response to doing difficult work in systems of oppression and to end gender-based violence. And we know that that can have major impacts as well on advocates in so many different facets of their life. It's not just how they're showing up to work, although that matters, right? When we're starting to feel fatigued and burnt out, the way we're showing up for the survivors we work with can be impacted. But even beyond the way that we're showing up for work, it takes a toll on so many aspects of our life: mind, body, spirit, but also the way that we're relating to ourselves, to our families and loved ones, and to our communities at large. And so then, as sort of a counterpoint or a way to think about remedying this, we also talk about this concept of balance and harmony. So sometimes we'll use this in place of wellness. We might use wellness and balance and harmony kind of interchangeably. Really, it's an idea that it's a transformative practice to dismantle oppression. Looks like we have a participant sharing screen. Thanks, Ku. And we know that it kind of widens the idea of wellness from just being about the individual to being something that is really wider and about our way of showing up in the work of social justice. If we're not in balance, we're not able to show up for the social justice work that we do. And everyone has a role in creating a more balanced and harmonious life and workplace. And ultimately, we know that even if you have the best intentions for yourself and the way that you show up in your workplace, if where you're working or the institutions that you're working with or your community is not supportive of that balance for advocates, then that is going to create barriers to having that type of wellness in your work. And so the responsibility is on all of us, including us as individuals and organizations and systems, to create a more balanced space for advocates to be well. So that's just a brief overview of some of the things that we talked about in session one. I won't repeat everything. It was a great session to lay down that framework, but also to hear from all of the attendees, some of whom might be with us again today, about what they wanted to talk about in these upcoming sessions. So we were able to do a lot of feedback and input from the attendees on our first Rural Restore session, to hear about what they want to dive into with the rest of this series and what topics are most important to them in their rural advocacy. So hopefully we can jump into some of those topics you shared or you might have shared on session one with our advocates today. Before we do, I want to start with something that we at Praxis call our working agreements. It's just a way that we've created to name what's important to us and our values for how we share space together when we're in conversation. And I'll invite our advocates to help me read them today. Praxis works to end gender-based violence by eliminating all forms of oppression and creating equity in the world, as well as within our organization. Promoting equity necessitates challenging interpersonal manifestations of oppression. The purpose of the working agreements is to guide peer-to-peer interactions and training practices for faculty, staff, consultants, and participants engaging in our events.
The agreements rely on individual reflection, truth-telling, transparency, and loving acknowledgement of the ways in which we all have power and privilege by honoring ourselves, honoring others, honoring our communities, and honoring our spaces and places.
We agree to respect and embrace our differences and our similarities. We agree to promote balanced participation and open discussion. We agree to assume good intentions and assume the best of each other. We agree to be fully present and focus on the work at hand. We agree to attend to our needs by nurturing ourselves mind, body, and spirit.
We agree to disagree respectfully. We agree to do our best and be good allies. We agree to name oppression when it surfaces and to not repeat oppressive misinformation after we have learned otherwise. We agree to respect each other's privacy. We agree to start and end on time.
Thank you all. So great to hear your voices and get started even just hearing from you on this call. Before we jump in, I do want to actually hear from everyone else who's attending today. And we'll do that using a Menti poll. So some of you might be familiar with Menti. I'll put a link in the chat that you can click. It should take you to a poll question to be able to answer just how are you feeling today? And we're using this sort of framework of a weather report, right? So if you had to think of yourself and how you're showing up in relation to one of these weather outcomes, what would that be for you? So I'll give a few minutes for folks to fill out this poll. I'll also pull it up on screen so we can see what you're answering. Give me one moment. Oh, Ku's on it. Awesome. Thank you, Ku. All right, what are we getting? Our options are sunny, stormy, windy, foggy, cold, and a rainbow. And it's up for your interpretation what any of those mean to you. Give a few more seconds. It's fun to see the results coming in and just hear what you're bringing to the call today. It's like we got a lot of folks with a foggy mood or perspective feeling coming into the webinar. We're kind of split across most of the others. A couple windy and cold, a little stormy, a few sunnies. One more moment if you haven't voted yet in the Menti. Great. Thank you all so much for sharing how you're feeling, what you're bringing to the call. We'll use Menti again a little bit later to be able to hear from you, your reactions and thoughts to this conversation. So it was a good way to introduce it and just hear how you're feeling, how you're doing. And with that in mind, I do want to take a few moments to actually ground us in our bodies. This is all an invitation. You're welcome to go or stay off screen as I lead us through it. But especially considering that a lot of us are showing up a little foggy, feeling a little foggy as we get here, this might be helpful to help kind of ground into our bodies and feel centered and a little bit more mindful. So I'm going to walk us through a practice called progressive muscle relaxation. If you don't like anything that I'm doing, you don't have to do it. You can get up and walk around. You could lay down if there's somewhere to lay down near you. Put your head down on your desk. You could space out. Whatever does give you that moment of feeling reflective and grounded and mindful. It's all an invitation of what feels good to you. But if you want to join me, I'll ask you to find a comfortable seated position where you can have your feet flat or near flat on the ground. Take a moment to get settled into where you're sitting. The basic premise of this practice is that I'll invite you to tighten and tense, flex and squeeze a certain muscle group, and hold that, and then release it. And we'll kind of move up our bodies from near the bottom to near the top in that progressive way. And doing this can sometimes help us uncover tension that we didn't know we had in our muscles or our joints, things that we didn't know were hurting, and can just bring us into a grounded place of feeling all the different parts of our bodies and our physical beings. So first, I'll ask you to think about your feet. In your shoes or your socks, whatever you're wearing, tighten up all of the muscles in your feet and your toes. Squeeze everything as tight as you can. Just hold that. Maybe curl your toes under, flex your ankles, and release it all. We'll keep moving up the legs. And think about your calves. The lower half of your legs, especially if you're seated, sometimes don't get a lot of blood flow. So let's think about that. Flexing our calves, you might lift your toes off the ground or your heels, feeling that tension and squeezing in your calves. Hold that and release it. We'll keep moving up. Think about our thighs and the upper parts of our legs. Your quads in the front or your hamstrings in the back, and big supportive muscles. Think about flexing, holding, squeezing, maybe involving your seat muscles as well. holding everything tightly and letting it go. We'll keep moving up into the centers of our bodies. This might involve our abdomens, the cores, our hip muscles, the things around the center of our being. You hold that nice and tight, squeeze it in. You might feel a little compression on your breath. Hold that nice and squeezed tight and tense. And let it all go. Nice exhale. Next, we'll move into our arms. So not using our hands yet, just thinking about our arms, and that might stretch a little into your chest muscle, but thinking about our arms, holding tension, maybe through a bicep or forearm feeling, getting nice and tense like you're carrying something heavy, holding it nice and tight, and releasing. And we'll move down to our hands now. So we'll curl our hands into little fists, make a little ball, get your fingers nice and tightly held, squeeze them, all those small muscles in your hands that do so much for you throughout the day. Squeeze them nice and tight and release them. And we'll move to our shoulders and our neck muscles. My God, this is my most tense part of my body. Maybe it is for you too. You might raise your shoulders up really far, tense them up towards your ears, maybe tilt your head to one side or the other, something that makes you activate and feel the muscles in your shoulders or your neck. Hold that nice and tight, and then release it. Let your shoulders drop down even a little further than they might have been before you started. And the last thing we'll do is all of these muscles in our face, in our jaw, in our eyes, our temples, the space between our eyebrows. Squeeze everything. You might feel like you're making a really funny face. Don't be afraid to make that funny face. Squeeze it as tight as you can. Hold it and let it go. Take a moment, does anything feel different in your body? Does anything feel looser? Are you more in touch with a certain part of your body than you were before we started? You might shake out your arms a little bit, shake out any part of you that's still feeling that tension that we just created. Hopefully that brings you into the space that you're in, into your physical bodies, and ready to move into some dialogue together. So I'll invite Candy, Serenity, and Nora on screen and have them spotlighted, joining us in conversation. And let's get into it. I'm excited to talk with all of you. I'm waiting for everyone to get up just for accessibility purposes. Awesome. Hi. So let's start with our first question. We're talking today just about what it's like to work in a rural community, the strengths and the challenges that come along with trying to practice wellness or be in balance while working in rural advocacy programs. So let's start with just thinking about the positive aspects of where we work. What do you like about working in your rural community? Any of you want to jump in?
I think that I enjoyed working in this rural community. I think there's pros and cons to both of anything that I would say, but just having it be a small knit community where I have grown up here. And let me start with, I am Candy, and I'm with the Catherine Cobb Safe House, and I'm in Michigan. And the community in which I live in is really just a small community in that I've been working in this field for the last 30 years. So I went to college here, and I started my internship, and I have been in this same organization for the last 30 years. And I think that has a lot of benefit to it. And so building relationships with community partners and community agencies and coworkers and family as well.
I can go next. Hi, everybody. I'm Serenity Holbrook, pronouns she, they, and I'm at Turning Point in Western Wisconsin. And kind of the opposite of Candy, I am a transplant to where I'm working. So I moved here 3 years ago. Um, and what I love about working in a rural program is that everyone in the community, survivors and community members alike, has been really welcoming, and really open. Everyone they hear from I'm from Ohio, and suddenly everyone wants to talk about college football or how bad the Browns are this season, or X, Y, or Z. So everyone's been really open and welcoming and conversational, and I really like that about my little rural program.
So my name is Nora Heaton again. She, her pronouns. I'm with Riverview Center, which we have several offices. The main office is in Dubuque, Iowa, but we've got the whole kind of northeast quadrant of Iowa, and then a few counties in western Illinois that we serve. Almost all of the counties are rural. There are two that are metropolitan, but I'm the Rural Services Coordinator. We've been in this specific organization for about 5 years. What I really love about our rural communities is, and working within them, is how resilient they are and how resourceful they are. It's just really encouraging to see that if there is a need, like people will come together and figure out a way to meet the need. There are a lot of people that we work with in our rural communities who are used to kind of making do with not enough resources, stretching resources to make sure that they fit the need. And also I think, one thing that I appreciate is the proximity that you have as an advocate to all of the key players in the community. Like you might have the sheriff's cell phone number. That's not something that I've ever experienced in a city. So those are some things I enjoy.
Thanks, everyone. And I'm hearing already as you're talking, the way that your role as an advocate isn't isolated to just the work that you're doing in your program and the survivors who come to you, but it's bigger than that. It's about your own history in the town where you've lived. It's about how the town has welcomed you or the community has welcomed you into their space and the relationships you've been able to build. And so I want to focus a little bit more on that and just think about that. We've heard from rural advocates all over the country that their role in their community is unique, and it's often different than advocates who are in a more urban area. Everyone might know everyone. There might be this smaller, more close-knit sense of community. And so some advocates have described feeling, judgment for the work that they're doing, whereas others have talked about feeling like they're always on or they always need to be on no matter where they are or what they're doing in the community. So for all of you, I want to hear about your experience. How has your work as an advocate affected your relationships in the community?
Well, I can say, having started my work with Turning Point as in the legal realm, um, coming into small town courts or small town police departments, small town sheriff's offices, um, as somebody who is there for the survivor, and that survivor may not have a lot of trust in the systems that they've been forced to rely on. Um, so going into those systems, those places, as somebody who advocates for survivors, it's a hot or cold thing, right? You'll either go there on a day where everyone's really on board with survivor advocates and loves that we're walking people through these systems and engaging with them and helping process and support them, or you go there on a day where nobody wants you there, Nobody understands why you're there or what purpose you serve. In Wisconsin, our role, especially in the criminal justice system, is legislated. So survivors have a legal right to have an advocate with them through every step of the criminal justice process. And not everybody agrees with that. Not everybody understands the role that an advocate plays and really thinks it should be, all cops, all courts, all the time. So that's tough working in small systems where everybody in the system knows each other and how they handle cases like these.
I agree, Serenity, in that it can feel lonely, but it can also feel like you have a community supporting yourself. As an agency, I agree with the hot and cold days and times. Sometimes it's the context that kind of matters on the survivor that you're working with. And it can also feel just tiresome, right? And so you just gravitate towards those relationships that are like-minded, and that will help to build and strengthen those relationships. Like in our county, we have prosecutor advocates, and then we have ourselves, and I also work in the legal realm as a legal advocate for this private nonprofit organization. So I try to, in working with survivors, say that we're developing a team approach so that the survivor is not feeling alone and isolated, and us as advocates aren't also feeling alone and isolated. So we're really building a team approach to work towards and work through the challenges that the survivor might be working through when there is the criminal justice piece. There is also the fact of building those relationships with survivors. And Elena, when you said that there's individuals who feel like they always have to be on, right? And as an advocate and working in this field for as long as I definitely have those challenges. But in my role, I live out my role. So I am who I say I am, both in work and out of work. So family might challenge me, friends might challenge me, but they also know who I am and what I stand for, because it doesn't change whether I'm in my legal advocate position or if I'm my children's mother or, etc. So that can be a challenge, that you just never let go of your position.
Hi, my name is, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
My name is.
And somebody else.
You were jumping and I think you muted yourself again.
I work in the lower part of Illinois, from Effingham down, which nobody even knows exists. It's very, very rural. And I work for legal aid. And I have done not this role with the attorneys, but I've investigated elder abuse for the state for 12 years. And I've been doing social work for 30 years in this area. And I have been in every county down here. And I'm telling you, since most of my work has had to do with legal stuff, I'm very familiar with state's attorneys and the small town police forces that in some of these counties, unfortunately, they are not very supportive at all, especially when it comes to your female victims. It's really a good old boy kind of mentality. It's very frustrating because you know, you've done everything right, and yet it's still the stress of them not listening is very frustrating, and the resources that are not available. We have one women's center for, I don't know, 15 counties.
Mm.
And it's not a great women's center. So, I mean, we're on the borders of Kentucky, on the border of Indiana and Missouri. So you think there'd be more, but there isn't. And it's becoming very frustrating down here in the area because so many of our funds go up north. And I'm originally from Chicago, so you're never going to hear me bash Chicago, but they are getting a lot of our funds up there, and we've kind of just been forgotten down here. And it's difficult. There's a lot of prejudice down here also.
Thank you, Sue. I'm glad you jumped in and shared that, and I think it resonates with already what I'm hearing from Candy and Serenity as well about sometimes these interactions with the local systems and the kind of institutions we're trying to help survivors through can really take a toll on us as staff, that those interactions can really grate down on you, wear down on you, and sometimes the resources that you have to manage that stress, you know, might be limited. You might not have what is needed in a rural community to be able to manage some of those stressors. Nora, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I appreciate that point a lot. And I also appreciate the point and the nuance of, you know, it's not necessarily that we want to, in this case for Illinois, to take resources away from Chicago, but why are there not enough for everyone? And I think that that is often true too, that you know, even sometimes there are metropolitan-based agencies that are contractually covering rural areas as well. And so then similarly, a lot of those resources get focused on the cities. You know, and it's not that maybe that those organizations are unwilling to serve rural communities, but they don't have the same proximity as if they were truly in those communities. And there aren't necessarily enough resources to be in those rural communities that, you know, there can be proximity all the time. Sometimes there are just big geographical barriers or other resource barriers, financial, in getting to those resources at all. So I thought that was a great point. And also hear you on the idea of, you know, sometimes the stakeholders in those communities can be resistant to the services. And I think that that has especially come up in my experience with just some of the complexities of domestic and sexual violence. It is really hard to explain all of those complexities sometimes, and I think we all know that, and especially in a community where it's a, you know, the law enforcement there is a small force. Maybe there aren't a ton of cases altogether, you know, that they deal with, and sometimes they just don't have the training to fully understand all of those complexities. And so it's difficult as an advocate, I feel sometimes, where, you know, maybe there have only been a few cases that we've truly worked on with a certain like law enforcement entity. And their memory of those cases may be, well, the victim in that case, you know, what was had a really complicated situation, and it was really hard for us to work through, and it was confusing. You know, maybe they have that in their mind, and then it kind of ties to us as advocates as well, because we've been advocating for the survivor in those cases. And like that can be a really difficult relationship. And then to bring back to our other question of being an advocate in those spaces, then that changes the way that law enforcement views us personally too, you know. And so what if, you know, I, as an advocate, if I need to access law enforcement for something, that's a little bit more of a complication for me now because I have a professional working relationship with them. And I think that applies to a lot of different community resources.
And sorry, not to jump in. I think this kind of comes back to what Candy was talking about, context. Um, the context in which a survivor is experiencing violence and experiencing abuse. Um, I definitely see those community relationships, those stakeholder relationships more come into play with um, white survivors, white female survivors predominantly, um, middle and upper class survivors, because violence affects everybody. But yeah, Black survivors, poor survivors, um, male, trans, and non-binary survivors as well. Um, in our little rural area, we're working with 17 local law enforcement agencies, and very few, if any of them, really get those complexities of context around those marginalized survivors.
Right, and there's so many complex contexts, to use that term that you're putting out there, that we're all working within, both in terms of the systems that we're helping survivors through, but also the identities that we hold as advocates that we bring to the work. So many of us are survivors ourselves, or bring other lived experiences and identities that can make the way that the work impacts us really different from one person to the next. And I think that's just natural to the type of work that we're doing. And I want to think about that with each of you, just, all of these complexities you're describing, the challenges you might face in trying to guide a survivor through some of these processes or walk with them. When you go home at the end of the day, what impact is that having on you? How is that affecting how you're showing up for yourself, or for the people in your life, or with the people in your life, with the relationships that are important to you, whether it's with yourself or with others? What impact is this work having on you?
I got the opportunity to preview a little bit of your previous session and hear some of the feedback from the participants, and knowing that some of them are just, and maybe some that are even on here today that are just feeling tired. And I just want to be a little bit, if I can, just be a beacon of light and hope. And that in working in the field for as long as I have, it's important to know yourself, and know what you stand for, and know what you're hoping for, and that is your goal each and every day that you go to work, is that you're still hoping for that better tomorrow for the survivors that you're working with, because that's what they want. They want that better tomorrow, and whatever that's going to look like for them, whether that's to maintain the relationship that they're in, or to get out and get into a healthier relationship with somebody else or with themselves, or whatever that looks like for them. And so when you ask about what does that look like for us and how do we go home, I think that in my field, and many times I've been accused of being like the Pollyanna and the Mary Sunshine, because I'll say Mary Monday, and I'll say, I just kind of throw in some positives each and every day, and I'm always maybe to a fault, devil's advocate, and that there's always a different perspective to see, to try to consider, especially when we're working with survivors that maybe the community or different sectors don't necessarily see that survivorship as maybe legitimate. Maybe they are being the ones that are being considered the perpetrator. And so we're always looking at, that context. Where did that come from? How could that be? Is not everything that's on the surface isn't the reality. There's so much more beneath the surface if we would just take the time. And so I try to do that also in my own personal life, and understanding that the surface of what I do is working with survivors, but there's so much more under there of who I am and what I represent and how I want to bring up my family, and how I want to just change, even if I can, that small circle in which I am involved at home, at church, at work, at play, right? I don't know if that makes sense, but we'll let you run with that for a minute.
Well, I, probably with that said,
Hi, Sue.
and I'm not burnt out. I literally, have done this for probably 30 years the same. But I think what has helped me is I've had to learn my limits.
Mhm.
I've had to learn what I can and cannot do. I also rely heavily on sarcasm. People can be garbage. I mean, they really can be garbage, and they can be terrible to one another. And it's just the world we live in. And I know for myself, I use a lot of, I said, sarcasm and comedy, because you have to laugh at some of this, because if you don't, you will break. I literally was on the phone with a client that was having her children taken away from her for no reason. The father was the abuser and had beat her severely, and they took her children away. And she was crying and screaming, the cry of only a mother would know, that is having their child taken away from them. And there just was nothing I could say to her that would make it right, because I knew it was wrong what was happening. And I know when I got off that call, I had to immediately go into a meeting. And I just kind of bowed out of the meeting. I said, you know what? I need to take a moment to myself, because it just drained everything emotionally out of me. Because it was, how do you fight against a system that sometimes doesn't work? Especially doesn't work for people who can't afford it to, or, it can be very frustrating, feel like you're banging your head up against a wall. And yet you've got to be the bright face for this client and let them know that, you're going to make it, and it's going to be okay. But I do not have I'm not Polly Sunshine, though. I definitely not. I'm more sarcastic.
Thanks, Sue.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I mean, there are many ways to approach this, right? In terms of how does this impact you? And then what do you do with that impact? How do you carry that? Is it with humor? Is it with, trying to see many different perspectives, finding optimism? And some days is it just hard, and it's okay to sit in those challenges or find, ways to process them. There's many ways that this impacts us. Like we said on that slide earlier, mind, body, spirit, relationships, it comes down hard in many different ways. I see some folks engaging on that topic in the chat too, but
I was just, yeah, I was just gonna say, I really like what Tiffany said here. Yeah, kind of the opposite from Candy. Again, I go home and I feel like the specter haunting the feast, right? Um, I don't talk about my work with my partner, with my family, with my friends, partly because of confidentiality, right? But also, you know, if you're out with friends or you're out with your partner, you don't want to ruin the vibe, so to speak. And you also don't want to feel like you're shoving this off onto other people, right? The reasons we get into this work is and the reasons we stay in this work, like Candy has, is because we feel strong enough to carry that. And it it feels shameful almost to admit that sometimes you do need help carrying and processing all of it. But yeah, I'm kind of with Tiffany here. I don't really talk about my work
For sure.
with, my family, especially. Um, yeah, nothing like being the buzzkill for sure. Um, yeah, so yeah.
Yeah, I think that those are all such good points. And I think that really speaks to the differences in all of us and what we use to carry ourselves through that work. Like I have noticed for myself, I like to be really connected to why I do what I do so that I can remind myself. Because my service area is 16 counties. And so if I'm driving most of the day and I'm like eating in the car and my legs hurt, like it's just it's exhausting. And I need to be able to remind myself why I'm willingly doing something that's exhausting, that exhausts other people to even hear about in like a general confidential way. That can be really challenging. And I know that a lot of rural advocates as well don't have a very, very well-staffed office that they're working out of either, which means that then our options for peer support are also really limited. That's something that I know affects a lot of rural advocates. And um, it's also helpful for me to remember that progress is not linear. Um, and there are a lot of times that, maybe we'll be trying to work on, kind of the concept of community care with a specific community, and it'll seem like we're making great progress and community partners are really getting on board. And then something happens that just kind of seems to undermine some of the progress that has been made. And it feels discouraging, but also I have to remember for myself that that progress was still made and it just might not be a full linear scale up. But those seeds have still been planted. I kind of think of it as, the way we think about, the number of times that it might take to leave an abusive relationship. It also is kind of similar in the ways that we as humans process just societal change or cultural shifts in thinking and philosophy. So I try not to get too discouraged when I see evidence of how badly sometimes we treat each other and how badly we respond when we treat each other badly. And remember that we are making progress, and that's part of my why.
I love that, Nora. And I so appreciate everyone's comments. And Sue, thank you so much for sharing your experience too, because each and every one of us are dealing with some of those really traumatic life experiences that people are experiencing. I want to say that it is crucial, I guess, in our world that we are able to compartmentalize, because I have adult children now that are now coming in contact with people that say, hey, I know your mom, and they would have never known, because I don't talk about work either at home, because that's when I go home, but there's still that underlying love and respect and hope that there is still good in people. And I think it's Tiffany and somebody else had made mention of how you can easily become cynical because of how the systems just are not being kind, for the lack of a better word, right? And so when I say bring into that devil's advocacy, I'm not recognizing that my role is really quite unique as a victim's advocate, and that going back and trying to understand the other systems and their roles, and understanding that they are people that probably got into their fields because they also want to help people. They're just doing it in a different capacity, with a different title, with different set of policies that where we come in as advocates and say, we want to work on systems change. We want to work on societal difference, societal change, right? And that, well, how difficult is it to be kind to one another and to support victims and hold perpetrators accountable? It seems like a really simple concept, but yet here we are all here dealing with it each and every day. So I feel you, and I'm here, I'm with you, and I understand that cynicalism and how easy it can get, you can get pulled down into just feeling defeated. But if we feel defeated, how are our victims feeling? So we keep plugging forward to help them.
Yeah, and Nora, I love that you brought up, that idea of community care, and I'm hearing too, just in what has been shared by all of you and in the chat, some of these impacts are really on our worldview or our lens that we are using sometimes as a result of the work that we're doing. So you might feel that cynical sense, you might feel some heightened anxiety or barriers to trusting other people. Those are a lot of the, thoughts that we heard from rural advocates when they're sharing what burnout or fatigue feels like for them. Some of those interpersonal aspects can really be strained because of the work that we're doing and the effect of everything that we see and talk to survivors about, and those dark, what someone used the phrase in the chat, the horrors of DV. Like, that's the stuff that if we're immersed in that, it can change the perspective that we're approaching our community with. And so often, though, we know, and all of you even shared in your first question, what's most valuable, or one of the most valuable things about being in a rural community is the community, right? The interaction, the relationships, the tight-knit kind of sense of knowing each other and the resourcefulness that grows from that. And so, I don't know, I hear that a lot from advocates and even from all of you, that there's challenges to engaging in those positive aspects of rural life that can result from our work and the lens that it can put over our eyes sometimes, and our ability to seek support from those around us. But I want to hear what you have experienced in terms of community care for advocates. So we know that we are often helping survivors through all types of scenarios and trying to help them find their circle of care and trust. But when it comes to advocates in your program, or to you, what are some of the more powerful examples of community care that you've witnessed or experienced, if you have?
I can say there was a community a while back where they were doing a declaration or a proclamation at I think the Board of Supervisors meeting or a city council meeting or something for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And someone who was a very prominent person in that community was asked by the advocacy organization to speak. And so this community member came to the meeting and shared about how his life had been personally impacted by domestic violence through a family member, and talked about the importance of that family member and their entire family having support in that experience. And this was something that from the conversation that happened after throughout the community, it seemed that very few people had known this about this person. And I noticed that it really opened up a lot of conversations within the community about the importance of support. The local weekly newspaper, had printed a story about Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And this person was quoted in the story as well. There were more referrals that came from that community after that. And it just really seemed to open a conversation that had not been opened before. Because I do think that one thing that comes up, especially the smaller the community is, the more likely some of the members are to say, I don't know anyone who has experienced this in the community. I don't think that that's often as true as people say it is. I think definitely it could be true that, you know, no one has ever disclosed to you that they've experienced this. But then what that tells me is just that we need to do more work on the community care aspect of being safe places for people to go with that information. And by that one person coming forward in that meeting, and sharing about this family member who he had lost, who had been impacted, a lot of people were having conversations that they'd never really had before.
Yeah, I really like you talking about the like private, almost like insular nature of a lot of the smaller communities. Because it almost feels like going back in time, you know, philosophically, about ideas around domestic violence, right? A lot of the smaller like villages and townships that we service, it's, you know, intimate partner violence is still viewed as a very, very private thing. It's not seen as a neighborhood issue or a township issue or a community or social issue. Um, and that can be really hard when we're coming in as social change advocates saying, no, this is a broader issue and there are structural systems in place here and there are philosophies in place here that lead to this kind of harm. I will say, you know, in our experience, um, community care for advocates doesn't really exist. You know, our care systems are either very personal, so our individual support systems, or they're institutional in the sense of within the organization, right? Um, Communities show up for our fundraising events. They show up for our awareness events. They sometimes even show up for our prevention stuff. But in terms of quote unquote showing support, right? That's not really happening in our neck of the woods, unfortunately.
I would say, yeah, I think we internally do a lot more advocate care and making sure that we can take care of ourselves and that we place a predominant focus on self-care for us as advocates so that we can continue to do the job and know that that self-care is so very important. But as far as community care, in our community here in Michigan, as frustrated as I can be with the system and sometimes how the lack of resources, we really do have a community that will come together and have had community collaborations that bring the key players of or different organizations to strategize how do we overcome some of the challenges that our survivors and our population of care are in particular our intimate partner violence survivors. How do we help them? How do we help each other help them? And so we have organizations that have come together and created like a re-bicycle program for transportation. We have transportation assistance that's been pulled together. We have like our organization solely houses women and children, but we serve all survivors. So we've had to come together and strategize how are we going to take care of the male population that comes and identifies as victims and help support them. And so we've got some hotel partnerships that we've developed. We have a shelter for men that is also a partner to us. So I think that that community partnership is really important, and those relationships we have just kind of weaved in and out of ebbs and flows throughout the years to continue to strategize on how to meet those needs as a community.
Really quick, I really love Tova's question in the chat asking about establishing validity in the work. Our example, my agency's example is just time. Turning Point's been operating some program or another for almost 40 years. So we've just kind of been embedded in the community. We've got folks calling us now who are survivors saying, oh yeah, I stayed there with my mom 25 years ago. And so they knew about us and they had an experience and they reached out to us almost immediately. And they have a positive experience with us and they tell their church groups or their youth groups or their book club or their student organization on our local satellite campus. So yeah, one example of establishing validity is just time. It happens eventually, right?
I love that, Serenity. That's so true.
I feel like we could talk about this for about 5 more hours and still not even scratch the surface. But that's not very good balance and harmony if we go way into the afternoon or the evening, as much as I would love to. But I think that you've all shared a lot of really important experiences and insights about all of these nuances of working in a rural community, how it impacts you, how it is different when working with survivors in your area than it is maybe in an urban area, and how that affects our ability to be balanced in our workplace and in ourselves and who we show up as at work, but at home too. And with that, I just want to hear from each of you, just if we use this concept sometimes of a wellness basket, right? Because wellness is not just one thing. You can do that one progressive relaxation activity I did with you every day, and it still probably wouldn't put you fully in balance, right? It's one practice. We know that wellness is many layers, is many aspects, and we put them all in our little toolbox or our little basket. So I want to know for each of you, what's in your wellness basket? What helps you feel balanced, and what do you value in that?
I don't know if you've been able to tell. I'm a big fidgeter. I always have something in my hands. Usually it's a pen. I have a basket of fidget toys on all 3 of my desks. So I'm always fidgeting, having something in my hands, or just moving around in general. I also really value alone time, much more than I used to. I'm a pretty extroverted person. Like I like being around people and out in the community and things. But, like we were talking about, I don't really talk about work in those spaces. So I've really learned to value my alone time wherever I can get it, especially early in the morning, getting ready for work, really being present in that time. Um, and just, yeah, anytime I can really be wholly and presently in myself um, for any stretch of time.
I think for me, one thing that was actually highlighted in the chat, I think the way, I can't remember who it was exactly, but the way it was highlighted is you don't want to defend your work after a long day. And that really, I relate to that a lot. And so one thing that I've noticed that I need in my wellness basket is a a social network of people who are not going to pester me about how I should not do work. That stresses me. Because it's not like I haven't thought about this. It's not like I'm not aware that it's stressful work sometimes. So it's not something I really need to be actively reminded of from other people. But I mean, what I really find that I need is for people to just be with me when I'm not feeling at my best without trying to fix it. And especially when the way to fix it is, well, you should get a job that's not in crisis work, or whatever the case is. And I've found that to be kind of a tricky social network to build. And I've had to be really specific with people about what kind of support I need in that way.
I agree with both of you, because I truly like my alone time as well, but I love a great road trip just to kind of just drive, and it's almost like pretending like I'm leaving and never coming back, knowing that I'm absolutely coming back. Laughter is a huge thing. Laughter is the great medicine. And Sue, there's some sarcasm in there that shows up too, and partly that is for that sense of having a laugh in there, and just having caring friends and family. And my faith is a huge nugget in my basket.
The robust baskets. Thank you all for sharing them, and thank you for everything that you shared. It's not easy to speak honestly about the things that we're experiencing at work in our lives, especially with others listening in or to each other when we're still getting to know each other. But this is how we start to build that community of care, right? We can show up for each other, even in these ways virtually. Zoom isn't quite as connected as we would love it to be, but this is the kind of beginnings or some smaller steps that we can take to see each other and to build that kind of common understanding that we're not alone in these experiences, and we're here for each other to support each other. And it's happening all around the country. And if we can keep working together towards the strategies that fill our basket and that help us relate to our communities and ourselves in a more balanced way, then that's how we keep in this really necessary work that we're all doing. And thank you to the three of you so much. I do want to turn to all of our attendees who are also here listening in and hear your thoughts. After listening to this conversation, what are you taking away? What is sticking with you? What are you thinking about right now? And to do that, I'm going to actually put the Menti poll back into the chat and invite you to return to that link. We'll go to the open-ended question that is here. Let me make sure I'm in the right place. There we go. So what are you taking away from this dialogue? Would love to hear your thoughts. You can type it into the text box on the Menti. Many of you are already active in the chat, sharing, your responses, your reactions, what you're feeling. But take a few minutes, and even if it's just quiet time here for you to reflect and share your thoughts on this kind of whiteboard, would love to hear your takeaways, your thoughts.
The chat has been great to read, by the way. There's a lot of good questions and support and ideas in it.
I agree. Love seeing people offer each other different ideas and support that they're thinking about afterwards. And as you're doing your self-reflection here and thinking about what you're taking away, I see some folks putting it in the chat too. Whether you like the Menti or the chat, that's all great. You can also add questions in that you're still carrying. You might not have a specific reflection on what you heard, but something that it raised for you, a question or reflection that you want to talk more about. seeing be fully yourself in all you do, having a deep well of optimism. It kind of speaks to some of your Pollyanna comments, Candy, but I think optimism is often misunderstood as just Pollyanna or frivolous, but it's a practice. It takes work to be that optimistic.
It's evidence-based. Candy's been in this work a long time.
Grateful to all of you for sharing any takeaways, reflections on here and in the chat. Yeah, I love that. It's okay to not bring all of the work home. Take a break and just be. And we do need that sometimes. I think you all reference that not only is it just hard to talk about with the people in your life, but sometimes it's okay that you have space that's not focused on those subjects, and you can choose that. You know, if you need to talk about it with someone, I hope there are those supportive systems waiting for you or supportive networks. But if you'd rather have that space away, that's where the balance comes in. Awesome. How widespread the concerns and barriers are. Yeah, and local supports, change makers for our communities. I love that too, just the importance of coming together to talk about this topic for real. It's not often given the attention that it deserves. We know how many rural advocates are working tirelessly and sometimes up to that point of burnout without having spaces even like this one, just to hear that that's a common experience. They're not alone in that experience, and there are ways to make it through those moments and to step away and find space for yourself. Yeah, those widespread concerns and the connections that make that so important. I love seeing these responses from all of you. Such reflective takeaways. Anything from any of our advocate speakers that is standing out to you or that it makes you think about?
I saw something in the chat from Sheila, investing in self-care. I would say, expand your definition of self-care. It's not all just, sugar scrubs and body lotions and, sweet scented candles, right? It's investing in the little things that make you feel human. So yeah, do those with care.
Yeah. That's so great too that you bring that up. That's actually the next time we're gathered together under this banner of Rural Restore in this series. We'll be talking about a lot of those individual strategies towards balance. How are rural advocates finding or struggling to find those opportunities for self-care? What have they learned in that process, or what are they sitting with right now? I already hear a lot of need for that. Nora?
Yeah, I was going to say, I also really like it's one of the higher comments in this, but something about that it's not the fault of the agencies, the communities. It's not that they are flawed, but the broad culture of normalization of harm and violence itself is. And I think that's a really great point, and that is something that we are all just trying to navigate together. And for all of the challenges that exist and working within rural communities, there are some incredible strengths, and the same is true of any other type of community. And it's really just kind of an impossible world that we're trying to work in together. And that solidarity is really important.
Absolutely, Nora. I'm looking at one of the chat messages, and it's from Tova, and she says that she tells people a lot that if everyone walked away from stressful jobs, there would be so much more pain and isolation in our communities. which just kind of aligns with the idea of why does she stay? And why is domestic? And so we just got to keep trying to ask ourselves that, why do perpetrators do what they do? And then why do we stay in the job? Why? Because we have a system that we want to change. Why does the system do what they do? Because there is change that can happen, positive changes can happen to make our homes and our relationships more harmonious somewhere, some way. If we can make it different somewhere, that's what we're all hoping for.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that in these reflections and from all of you and what you've shared today too, that we're doing this work. It's not in a vacuum. It is within all of these other larger systems of oppression, of misogyny, racism, classism. We're working within these larger systems of oppression, doing social justice work, helping survivors and working towards change in our communities is social justice work, social change work. And that takes its toll. And there's a lot that feels like it's above us that we can't control. But these are the places we start to build those connections, to recognize that being in balance and doing these self-care or wellness activities is part of how we continue changing society, changing our communities for the better, and start chipping away at those systems that hold us all down. Yeah. Well, we can take the Menti off screen, and I'm so grateful for all that you shared in your reflections to the attendees. And I do want to try something out. Again, it was a suggestion from our last call. It's new, but let's think positive for just a minute. And I'm gonna tell you, I'm not like Pollyanna either. I'm working on my balanced optimism. So this is not me wanting to have a toxic positivity or anything funny like that. It's knowing that we are doing so much that is good and positive in our communities. And I want to hear about that. I want to hear about your wins and your achievements and a positive moment that you had, much like what Sue shared. It was a hard moment, but you were there for someone when they needed you most. So it could be as small as a one-to-one interaction with a survivor, or as large as a legislative win or effort that your community has put together with a turnout, to an event. So let's open the chat up, or even if anyone wants to come on mute and share any positive wins, successes, good moments from their work recently. I know we've got some brave folks who are ready to share. And while our attendees are thinking that through, for the three of you, is there anything that stands out to you, a positive moment from your work recently, something that's buoyed you or lifted you in this work?
Yeah, I've got one. This actually just happened not long ago today. I was in a meeting with a survivor, and they were telling me a story about how lately they've been repeating a behavior they had in childhood. They had a not so great, child growing up experience, but they couldn't really explain why they did it. And in our conversation together, kind of talking through it, we were able to identify why they were, having that reaction to, trauma and stress. And I can just watch some kind of weight come off of them, understanding that this is an okay thing to be doing and that it's actually helpful for them and that it's not disturbing or weird or wrong. And watching them embrace that as a part of healing was made my morning go pretty well.
That's so great. Thank you, Serenity. Any other stories in the chat or from either Nora or Candy?
think that I think a strength of our community is, even though different entities of which we work together might get frustrated with one another, we still come together. We just had an October Domestic Violence Awareness Month event, and I was still able to have law enforcement there to present. I was able to have our mayor there to present. And it's always exciting to have survivors that have come and like utilized different services, maybe once upon a time, and come and say, you know what, you helped me through whatever it was that I was going through at the time, and that really made an impact, and here I am today. And I'm like, those are things that are just so important, and whether with whatever entity or whatever service that they were able to take advantage of, whether that was making that police report or going through prosecution or simply just coming through the supportive services of our shelter. It's just, those are exciting things to hear.
It's really exciting. And you make a good point, Domestic Violence Awareness Month right now. I know so many programs have been swamped doing events and getting the word out about their work in the community. Hoping you've all seen successes and wins in that.
On top of end of fiscal year stuff. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
super fun time of year to be an advocate.
I do see a comment in the chat too about safe homing a survivor, allowing them to regain custody of their child. Wow, what a powerful, powerful story. And the work that you're doing is so needed. I know how many of you are carrying stories like that, whether it's from recently or sometime in your work. I hope that even if today nothing came to the top of your mind to share as a recent win or success or positive moment, that you'll carry that prompt with you through the rest of your day. I challenge you to keep thinking about something that you're proud of from your work recently, something that has made it feel worthwhile or made you feel that the work you're doing has meaning, because it does. It really does. We hear that, oh, and another story here, a client hosting their own neurobiology of trauma event. Yeah, allowing them to give back to their community. Huge. Huge. What growth, and what, that speaks to the support that they were receiving from you and from the other staff in your program. Wanting to give back is a really important step we see in healing for many survivors. Yeah.
I would like to follow up that the woman whose children were taken, and her husband was beating her so severely, and DCFS took her children. She has, it's been over a year, but she got her children returned to her, and completely the DCFS case is closed. Her abuser, anyhow, he is in federal prison, and he will not get out until 2028. So
Nice job, Sue. Me to be there with her through it all.
Yeah. Yep. The journey she's been through, I can't imagine how that's been for her, but knowing that she had an advocate fiercely alongside her and walking with her through all
lots of fidget toys.
Lots of
Like you said, Sereny, I bring them into court with them, and they hold them because they're just, they don't know what to do with their hands.
Yeah, this is a pro fidget toy environment. I have my own as well. All right, thank you all, and especially, again, keep sitting with this prompt. I hope you will. We are often very hesitant to celebrate ourselves and to acknowledge the importance and the good things that we're doing, but it matters, and I hope that you will carry that with you walking away. I'll also put a link in the chat right now if anyone who's with us is interested in being in the seat that Candy, Serenity, and Nora are in right now in the future, in our future Rural Restore sessions, and would want to engage in this type of dialogue with other rural advocates around the country. That's an interest form to be a part of that. Put that in the chat if anyone wants to fill that out and let us know you're interested. We may follow up with you and doing some planning for future sessions in 2025. In general, I'll ask Ku if you could pull that final slide back up. It's just Praxis's way to get connected with us if you want to be on our email list or you have any questions or follow-ups with us. You can email info@praxisinternational.org. and there will be an evaluation sent out to you for today's session. But thank you so much for being here, for engaging both verbally in the chat, in the Menti. Thank you to our 3 advocates who joined in the hot seat, so to speak. And thank you for just making time to be with us this afternoon, making time for yourself. I really look forward to connecting with all of you again in future Rural Restore sessions. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.